Whilst we've all been preoccupied with Sweaty Andrew's antics and Prince Harry's open-source approach to therapy, the real royal story has been lurking deep in the shadows. The British monarchy bases its legitimacy on two principles. 1. The royal bloodline, and 2. Being a legitimate heir. In other words, you're either born into it or you marry into it. So, for example, if the king has a mistress and she bears him a son, their love child can't make a claim to the throne. He might have royal blood, but he can't be king if he's not legitimate. And this is where old Ricky III comes into it. Around 10 years ago or so, archaeologists dug up a car park in Kent and found this skeleton. They were pretty sure they had found King Richard III. Not only had he been stabbed in all the right places, but he was almost as crooked as his modern-day counterparts. Although in Ricky's case, it was scoliosis of the spine, not a lack of moral fibre. Anyway, to be sure it was him, they sent off some DNA scrapings to be tested and compared with living relatives. And let me tell you, Ricky's mum has some explaining to do. Here's a little history lesson. The royal family are all descended from Ricky's brother, Edward IV. When Henry Tudor won the English Civil War, he had to marry Edward IV's daughter to join the royal bloodline and become King Henry VII. But here's the problem. When they tested the DNA of his brother, Ricky III, it didn't match. They definitely had the right skeleton, the maternal DNA matched, but the paternal DNA didn't. In other words, Edward IV and Richard III shared a mother, but had different fathers. And whilst there was no DNA testing back then to confirm, there was some evidence that his mother had been unfaithful. For one, her husband was fighting at war in France when he was conceived, and of course she may have just been pregnant for 11 months. In fact, that is the official story apparently. Although this wasn't quite convincing enough to stop Edward's political opponents from tarring his mother's name. But up until now, these stories were just rumours. So what does all this new evidence mean? Well, it means that Henry VII didn't actually marry into the royal bloodline, and that all of his descendants, meaning the current royal family, including old Lizzie and now Charles, are not actually legitimate heirs to the throne. In fact, years before this DNA test was done, Time Team tracked down who the true king would be if these rumours were true. And they tracked down an Australian farmer called Michael Hastings, who had hilariously voted in an Australian referendum to abolish the monarchy. If only he'd known. Sadly, that was about 20 years ago, and Michael has since assumed room temperature and passed his claim to his son, Simon Hastings, who has actually been invited to the coronation of King Charles. We'll just have to see if he takes an army of Aussies with him.